Breaking news. The college football playoff rankings have been revealed, and the top three stay the same. You got Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and then Washington coming in, or Georgia, Ohio State, excuse me, and then Michigan, and Washington coming in at number 4, so they leapfrog Florida State, who last week had bid number 4. So those two teams switch places. And for more on this, we bring in CBS Sports senior college football writer Dennis Dodd and college football playoff expert Jerry Palm. And gentlemen, let's start with number 1. Georgia, number 1 team in the nation. Of course, they took care of business last week against Tennessee. How much of a statement did they make, Jerry, in last week's game to put them as a firm number 1 here?
Yeah, every week that we go, Georgia seems to be making a little bit more of a case. It's hard to say that there's separation. This isn't a poll where you can look at vote counts and see, how it works. But obviously, the big win over Tennessee, a team that's still in the rankings this week. The last 3 weeks have really been for Georgia. This is when they start the case build for the number 1 spot. Now, obviously, they have to win out to stay number 1, but this is obviously a great run here that Georgia's on, and they're making a statement to the committee, and the committee's listening.
And Dennis, when you look at this ranking, it's not a surprise. Maybe it was a surprise that Georgia wasn't number 1, once the initial college football playoff rankings came out. But this is something that really has to satisfy Bulldogs fans and the alumni base, no?
Yeah, I mean, before the season, I think a lot of people, including myself, looked at that Tennessee game and said, well, oh boy, this is where it ends, or maybe where it ends, because the schedule was so Charmin soft. I already mentioned that right now it had Georgia's schedule strength is 76th. I think we all know they're a very, very good team. But it wasn't a very challenging schedule. And going to Tennessee for a revenge game, this is it. Joe Milton is going to come back, that rocket arm. They just stifled Tennessee like they have everybody else. And it's almost become like a metronome. It's almost like, oh, okay, here we go again. And they've done it with Carson Beck, who very quietly, he won't win the Heisman, I don't think, because Georgia distributes their talent so evenly across the roster. But he should get some consideration. The year after Stetson Bennett, he has thrown for at least 250 yards in all their games, in all 11 games. Now, that doesn't sound too impressive, but I think it reflects what Georgia is, and that's very consistent defensively, very consistent offensively. They're going to block you a punt, get you going on special teams. They're not flashy, just like their coach, but at the end of the day, they're very, very good, so I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, they're very good, and as you said, with Carson Beck, the start of the year to now, it's like night and day. First, you weren't really sure, but now he looks much more in command of this offense, very accurate ball thrower. But how about Ohio State and Michigan? The game this Saturday, number 2 against number 3. Jerry, let's be frank, what are the implications for such a hyped-up matchup that has so much on the line?
Yeah, last year, if you recall, Ohio State lost this game and still stayed in the college football playoff. This year, there's way too much competition for that to be a realistic expectation for the loser. And Ohio State would be the better qualified loser because of their non-conference win at Notre Dame. Or Michigan didn't play anybody like that. Otherwise, their schedules are pretty similar. So Ohio State would be a better at-large candidate, if you will, in the sense of if they go 11-1. But I don't think this year bodes well for a team that does not win their conference to get into the college football playoff. So the loser of this game is probably going to represent the Big Ten in the Orange Bowl and not the college football playoff.
So is there any way, Dennis, you can see a scenario where the loser of this game, particularly Michigan, would still get into the playoff? Because after all, they only have 1 loss. But as we know, not just 1 loss, or having 1 loss on your schedule is not the be-all, end-all, because it's about who your wins were against.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way. Obviously, there's a bunch of 1-loss teams out there that have not won their conference, and there's room at the top of the 4. There's certainly a way. But at this late date, to have 5 undefeateds at the top, not counting Liberty is the number 6. There's 5 overall, or 6 overall, 5 at the top. Knowing that the most we can have is 4 Jerry's absolutely right. The odds of a one-loss team that doesn't win his conference is going to have a problem getting in just for that sake. You've got the 4 undefeateds at the top that could easily do that. And I'm starting to think, by the way, I know Michigan's favored by 3.5. I'm starting to think Ohio State's going to win this game. There's so much in this. They've played better the last 2 weeks. 38-3, 37-3 against Minnesota. While Michigan, I don't want to say they stumbled. I thought they were very effective. Maybe should have won more by a bigger margin against Maryland. But I've been really impressed with Ohio State. And I've been down on them a long part of the season. I didn't like the quarterback play. I thought in one of those games they were relying on Marvin Harrison Jr. too much. They were a one-man team. But Travion Henderson, you see him there on screen. He's come back healthy. I think they might have a more complete team than Michigan right now. We haven't even gotten into the distraction of Jim Harbaugh not being there. Obviously, it hasn't mattered yet. But as I said before, I think the best result for the Big Ten in this game is that Michigan goes to 3 overtimes and wins by a field goal against Ohio State. And then the selection committee at least put it in their brain that they have to get 2 in.
Right. They're going to have an interesting dilemma on their hands, perhaps, if, big word, if we ever get to see that result with a 3 overtime thriller. But the big news of Tuesday night, gentlemen, Washington leapfrogging Florida State at number 4. Florida State goes down to number 5. Jerry, we talked about this before, but how surprised are you that it took this long, if at all surprised?
Oh, yeah, it should have happened a couple of weeks ago. Washington's strength of schedule, the quality of their wins have been better than Florida State's since 2 weeks ago. So they've been stacking ranked wins the last 3 weeks, and finally the committee has come to the realization that this is the better team, and they've had the better season. And the difference, though, has been the reason it's taken so long is that Florida State has been putting up big numbers, and this committee seems to be more enamored with big margins than previous committees have. But it's just too much this week, and Washington finally being rewarded for the quality of the schedule and the quality of the wins that they have played, teams that they have beaten so far, and that's why they're up here. This has nothing to do with Jordan Travis's injury. This was going to happen regardless, and it has to do with Washington finally getting a good enough resume together to change the committee's mind.
Dennis, why do you think it took so long? Because it looked like a no-brainer, you know, as Jerry pointed out, for a few weeks, but for some reason, the committee still stuck with Florida State.
I think that, like Jerry said, the committee was enamored with victory margin, and they weren't enamored with what the way Washington was playing those last seven games, winning them by a total of 45 points. I actually think it should work in that favor. I think that's the way they play. No, look, Florida State could have won by 500 points on Saturday with Jordan Travis throwing for 1,000 yards, and this still would have happened because of what we just mentioned. Washington has played better over the last few weeks. The quality of competition at Florida State hasn't been great. Now, again, with that, reminder that if either of these teams win the rest of their games, they're both going to be in. There's room for them at the top. But right now, it matters a lot that Washington is up there. I thought last week was a near selection committee crime, if you will, that they weren't, because Washington was playing better ball.
Yeah, and when we look at one-loss teams, gentlemen, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, those are the guys who have a real shot to make the playoff. Jerry, who was the one-loss team with the best chance to reach it, in your opinion?
It's Oregon, and not just because they're at the top of the rankings for those three, but Oregon actually has a clear path to the top 4. They get to play one of the undefeated teams in their conference championship game. Now they got to beat Oregon State first, and that's no gimme. But if they beat Oregon State and they beat Washington, Oregon is going to be the highest-rated one-loss team by virtue of having played in the best top-to-bottom conference in the country and avenging their only loss on a neutral field. So I think Oregon really is the one-loss team that controls its own fate for the college football playoff.
Dennis?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Oregon has the toughest road to go. They're already 2-1 against ranked teams. If they win those 2 games, they'll be 4-1. And they're the only team left that's in competition that plays 2 ranked teams. Obviously, Oregon State and then Washington. So they will be highly rated. Again, if there's 4 teams at the top that win their conference that are undefeated, they will be shut out. I don't think I have any problem with saying that because it's never not happened. But with 1 loss, Oregon has the best shot. I would dare say Texas because they've got that Alabama win in their hip pocket. I can't put Texas there, and they will play probably Oklahoma State or a ranked Oklahoma, and then in the championship game, and they have to beat Texas Tech this week, so their schedule's not as good. But clearly, Oregon has that path.
Right, and it's going to be, what have you done for me lately? And if they do pull it off, we'll be like, hey, we beat 2 ranked teams in the last 2 games of the regular season. 1 was a championship in our conference. Now, Jerry, let's fast forward to the final college football playoff rankings. What are your predictions for that, man?
Yeah, I have Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, and Florida State. So 3 undefeated teams and Oregon. That Michigan spot, that's basically the Michigan-Ohio State winner in that spot. And I'm kind of with Dennis. I'm starting to lean toward Ohio State this week. But Florida State finishing undefeated, and then Oregon winning out and getting that 4th spot.
All right. Dennis, do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I've got Georgia number 1. I do have Ohio State number 2. I think they're going to beat Michigan. And I have Oregon number 3 because what we just said, the best 1-loss team. And then I have Texas sneaking in at number 4. I think they're going to win out. Wow. And I think Florida State, I think Florida State's going to be, they cannot afford to lose. I think they're going to be knocked out. And Oregon would knock out Washington with a loss. And obviously, as a conference champion, we're sitting there looking at 4 conference champions. That goes big in the selection committee's eyes. So I think those 4 with Texas getting in.
All right. Well, only time will tell if you gentlemen are correct. Dennis Dodd, Jerry Palm, appreciate the time, gentlemen.